A billionaire CEO found his housemaid breastfeeding his infant son in the middle of the night, and what he did next would either save both their lives or destroy them forever. This is the story of a moment when mercy collided with power, and nothing would ever be the same. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ashford Tower like 1,000 desperate fists seeking entry. Eliza Monroe moved through the penthouse's shadowed corridors with practiced silence, her cleaning cart's wheels muffled by plush carpeting, worth more than she'd earned in a decade. The pharmaceutical billionaire's home occupied the top 3 floors of Chicago's newest luxury tower, a monument to Marcus Ashford's transformation of biotech innovation into a personal fortune that Forbes estimated at $8.3 billion. But tonight at 2:47 a.m., all that wealth couldn't silence the sound that made Eliza's heart clench with phantom pain: a baby crying. She'd been working the night shift for 3 months, ever since the accident. Ever since the day her husband Daniel's truck had been crushed by a fallen crane at the construction site, and the premature labor that followed had stolen her newborn son before she'd even had the chance to name him properly. The grief counselor said returning to work would help. The grief counselor was wrong. Every day in this monument to excess reminded her of what she'd lost: a child, a future, a reason to wake up. But that crying, that desperate, weakening wail coming from the nursery. Eliza's hands trembled as she abandoned her cart and moved toward Leo Ashford's room. The baby's cries had been growing weaker over the past week, a detail she'd mentioned to Diane Foster, the night nanny, twice. Both times, Diane had smiled with practiced dismissiveness and assured her that infants were naturally fussy and that Mr. Ashford's pediatrician had everything under control. But this wasn't fussy, this was pain. The nursery door stood ajar, revealing expensive monitor screens glowing in the darkness, a crib that cost more than a car, and absolutely no nanny. Diane's purse sat on the changing table, but the woman herself was nowhere to be seen. Through the windows, Eliza could see her, outside on the wraparound terrace, 43 stories up, smoking and talking on her phone, completely oblivious to the infant's distress. Leo's face was flushed crimson, his tiny fists clenched as he screamed with the kind of desperation that comes from being ignored for too long. Eliza's body moved before her mind could intervene. She lifted him from the crib, and her experienced hands immediately noticed what Diane apparently hadn't: he was burning with fever. "Oh, sweet baby," she whispered, checking his diaper, finding it soaked and unchanged for hours. His skin was hot and dry, his lips slightly cracked. When had he last eaten? The bottles in the warmer were full and cold, untouched. Eliza's maternal instincts, dormant for months but never truly gone, roared to life. She changed him quickly, used a cool cloth to bring down his fever, tried to coax him to take a bottle. He refused, turning his head away, his cries weakening to heartbreaking whimpers. She'd seen this before in her cousin's baby who'd gotten severely dehydrated. Leo was shutting down. The decision came from somewhere beyond logic, beyond fear of consequences. Her body still produced milk. The doctors said it could take months to stop completely after loss, especially with the grief delaying the natural process. She'd been binding herself, taking medication to dry up, but nature was persistent. She settled into the rocking chair, pulled down her work shirt, and guided Leo to her breast. The baby latched immediately, desperately, and began to nurse with the urgency of someone being pulled back from an edge. Tears streamed down Eliza's face as she felt the pull, the release, the purpose she thought she'd lost forever. For 20 minutes, she rocked and nursed Marcus Ashford's son, singing the lullaby she'd never got to sing to her own child. Leo's color improved, his breathing steadied, his tiny hand curled around her finger with surprising strength. That's when the lights blazed on. What the hell is happening here? Marcus Ashford stood in the doorway like an avenging angel, 6'2" of barely contained rage, wrapped in a $5,000 suit he hadn't bothered to remove despite the late hour. His dark hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, his ice blue eyes blazing with an intensity that had made competitors tremble across boardroom tables. At 41, Marcus had built Ashford Pharmaceuticals from a single patent into a biotech empire that was revolutionizing cancer treatment. He was brilliant, ruthless, and since his wife Catherine's death from the very cancer his company now treated, utterly closed off to anything resembling vulnerability. Behind him, Diane Foster rushed in from the terrace, her face a perfect mask of horror. "Mr. Ashford, oh my God, I just stepped out for 1 second." "Sir, please let me explain," Eliza began, trying to cover herself while keeping Leo secure. "Explain," Marcus's voice could have cut glass. "Explain why I find one of my housekeepers breastfeeding my son in the middle of the night. Explain why you're in here at all." He was crying, he was sick, he needed. "Needed what, you?" The contempt in his voice was withering. "Where the hell is the formula? Where is Diane?" "I was right outside, sir, monitoring the baby cam," Diane gestured to the screens. "I heard you arrive and came immediately. I've been trying to get Leo to settle all night, but he's been unusually fussy. I was just taking a breath of fresh air when this woman—" She let the implication hang, her eyes wide with feigned concern. Eliza stared at her in disbelief. "That's not true. You've been out there for at least 30 minutes. I saw you. He was burning up, dehydrated, you hadn't changed him." "That's absurd," Diane interrupted smoothly. "Mr. Ashford, I don't know what this woman thinks she's doing, but this is highly inappropriate. Dangerous, even. We don't know her medical history, what diseases she might." "He was dying," Eliza's voice cracked. "Look at him now, look at his color. He wouldn't take a bottle, he was shutting down and you weren't here." Marcus's jaw clenched. He looked at his son, now peaceful in the stranger's arms, then back at Eliza. For a moment, something flickered in his expression, confusion, perhaps even recognition of truth. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold calculation that had made him billions. "Victoria," he said quietly, and from the hallway, his head of household staff appeared. Victoria Chen was a woman in her 50s who ran Ashford Tower with military precision. "Call Dr. Morrison. I want Leo examined immediately. And I want this woman's background check pulled right now." "Yes, sir." Victoria's dark eyes assessed Eliza with clinical detachment. "Mr. Ashford, please," Eliza tried again. "I know how this looks, but I would never hurt a child. I lost my son 3 months ago, and when I heard Leo crying—" The words were a mistake. She saw it instantly in the way Marcus's expression hardened, in the way Diane's eyes gleamed with opportunity. "You lost a child," Marcus repeated, his voice deadly quiet, "and you thought that gave you the right to substitute mine." "No, I just wanted to help. Victoria, I want her out. Now. And I want to know how someone with recent psychiatric trauma was cleared to work in my home around my son." "I don't have psychiatric trauma," Eliza protested, but Victoria was already pulling her up, prying Leo from her arms. The baby immediately began to cry again, reaching for Eliza, and something in Marcus's face tightened at the sight. "Sir, with respect, something is wrong here," Eliza tried one more time desperately. "Please, check your security footage. Check the bottles, check how long." "Ms. Monroe," Victoria interrupted coldly, "you're terminated effective immediately. You have 10 minutes to collect your belongings and leave the premises, or I will call security to remove you." As Eliza was escorted from the nursery, she looked back to see Diane taking Leo, the baby's cries intensifying. Marcus stood watching, his expression unreadable, and for just a second, Eliza thought she saw doubt flicker across his features. But the door closed, and with it, any chance of being heard. The security office of Ashford Tower was all chrome and glass, with monitors displaying every angle of the building's 112 floors. Eliza sat in an uncomfortable metal chair, still wearing her cleaning uniform with the damp spots where Leo's tears had soaked through, while Victoria Chen and Marcus Ashford stood over her like judges at a tribunal. "Her file says she passed all standard background checks," Victoria was saying, her tablet glowing as she scrolled through records. "But this was filed 3 months ago, before the accident. There's a gap in her employment history, hospitalization records, and—" She paused, her expression tightening with something that might have been sympathy if Victoria Chen were capable of such things. "Psychiatric evaluation notes from grief counseling." "I went to 2 sessions," Eliza said quietly. "After my husband and son died. That doesn't make me crazy." "No one is saying you're crazy, Ms. Monroe," Marcus replied. though his tone suggested otherwise. He changed into a fresh shirt, all evidence of the late hour erased except for the shadows under his eyes. But you understand how this looks. A woman who recently lost a child found breastfeeding another woman's infant without permission. Another woman's. Eliza's voice rose despite her best efforts to stay calm. Your wife is dead, Mr. Ashford. Leo doesn't have a mother, and his nanny was neglecting him. The slap of silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's face went white, then red, his hands clenching at his sides. How dare you? I'm sorry, Eliza said immediately, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for, the bluntness or the truth. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant that Leo needed help and I gave it to him. That's all this was. Compassion, not substitution. Pull up the nursery footage from tonight, Marcus ordered, ignoring her. All angles. I want to see exactly what happened. Victoria's fingers flew across her tablet, then froze. Sir, there's an issue with the recordings. What issue? The nursery cameras experienced a technical malfunction starting at 2:15 a.m. They were offline for approximately 40 minutes. They came back online at 2:53 a.m., right around the time you arrived. Eliza's stomach dropped. That's impossible. The cameras were working when I went in. I saw the monitors. Or perhaps you knew how to disable them, Victoria suggested coolly. You've been working here for 3 months. You'd have learned where the system controls are. I clean floors. I don't hack security systems. Marcus turned to Victoria. Where's Diane? I want her account of tonight. As if summoned, Diane Foster appeared in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. She changed into a more professional outfit, pulled her hair back, and looked every inch the concerned caregiver. Mr. Ashford, I'm so sorry. I should have been more vigilant. I had no idea Ms. Monroe was having such severe psychological issues. I'm not. I noticed her lingering around the nursery more and more over the past 2 weeks, Diane continued, her voice trembling with just the right amount of emotion. Always finding excuses to be on that floor. I mentioned it to Victoria, but I thought I was just being paranoid. Now I realize she was planning this. Eliza stared at her in horror. That's a complete lie. I never, Victoria, did she actually report anything? Victoria checked her tablet. There's a note here from 10 days ago. Diane expressed concern about one of the night staff showing excessive interest in the baby. Excessive interest, Eliza's voice cracked. I asked if he was okay. He'd been crying for 3 nights straight and I was worried. Because you wanted to take him, Diane said softly, sadly. I understand, Ms. Monroe. I really do. You lost your child and your grief made you believe you could replace him with Mr. Ashford's son. It's a recognized psychological condition. Stop it, Eliza shot to her feet. Just stop it. You know that's not true. You know you've been neglecting Leo. How long have you been leaving him alone at night? How long has this been going on? Marcus held up a hand. Diane, describe your routine with Leo. Of course, sir. Diane's voice was steady, professional. I arrive at 10 p.m. for the night shift. I give Leo his 10:30 feeding, keep him on a 4-hour schedule, 2:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. Between feedings, I monitor him via the baby cameras. He's been slightly fussy this week, but Dr. Morrison said it was normal teething behavior. Tonight was no different until I stepped onto the terrace for literally 90 seconds. I timed it to take a call from my sister. The baby monitor was right there. She gestured to a device on her belt. When I came back in, less than 2 minutes later, Ms. Monroe was there with Leo. The bottles, Eliza said desperately. Check the bottles in the warmer. They were full and cold. He hasn't eaten in hours. Victoria walked to a small refrigerator in the corner of the security office where someone had brought Leo's bottles. She checked them. They're at proper temperature, recently warmed. That's impossible. Ms. Monroe, Marcus said, and the exhaustion in his voice was almost worse than the anger. I understand you're in pain. I understand loss in a way most people don't, but that doesn't give you the right to project your grief onto my son. I'm not projecting anything. I'm trying to tell you your son was in danger and may still be. Enough, the word cracked like a whip. Dr. Morrison is examining Leo now. If there's any sign of neglect or harm, we'll know. In the meantime, you're fired and you're not to come near this building or my son again. If you do, I'll file for a restraining order. Tears burned behind Eliza's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You're making a mistake." "No," Marcus said quietly. "You made the mistake. You let your grief poison your judgment, and you violated every boundary between staff and family. Victoria will give you 2 weeks severance pay, which is more generous than you deserve. Take it and go." "Sir," Victoria said carefully, "there is the matter of a possible police report. This could be considered." "No police," Marcus interrupted. "I don't want this in the press. My son doesn't need that circus. Just get her out." As security escorted Eliza toward the elevator, she heard Diane's voice drift from the office. "Thank God you came home when you did, Mr. Ashford. Who knows what she might have done?" The rain had intensified by the time Eliza stepped out of Ashford Tower and into the Chicago night. She had $127 in her bank account, no family in the city, and a studio apartment she'd lose at the end of the month without this job. The severance check Victoria had pressed into her hand felt like blood money. But more than the financial disaster, more than the humiliation, what burned in Eliza's chest was the certainty that Leo was still in danger. She'd seen it in Diane's eyes, something cold and calculated beneath the concerned caregiver mask. She'd felt it in the way the woman had lied so smoothly, so perfectly. Someone was hurting that baby, and she'd just been removed as the only person who seemed to notice or care. The storm swallowed her as she walked toward the bus stop, her phone dead, her uniform soaked through. She didn't know it yet, but she was walking toward 3 weeks of hell. 3 weeks of desperate job searches and rejected applications, of sleeping in her car when the landlord changed the locks, of rationing food and selling everything she owned just to survive. 3 weeks of wondering if Leo Ashford was still alive. Behind her, in the pristine tower that touched the clouds, Marcus Ashford stood in his son's nursery as Dr. Morrison completed his examination. "Well," Marcus demanded. The elderly pediatrician looked up, frowning. "He's slightly dehydrated, and his weight is down 2 ounces from last week. Not critically concerning, but I'd like to see more consistent feeding. Are you sure the night routine has been normal?" Marcus glanced at Diane, who nodded emphatically. "Absolutely, doctor. He's just been fussy." Dr. Morrison didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "Keep a close eye on his intake, and call me if anything changes." After the doctor left, Marcus stood over his son's crib, watching Leo sleep. The baby's color was better than it had been, he had to admit that, and the way Leo had reached for that woman when she was taken away. "Sir," Diane said softly from behind him, "I really am sorry about tonight. I should never have stepped outside." "No," Marcus agreed. "You shouldn't have, but you've been with us for 8 months. You came highly recommended. One mistake doesn't erase that." "Thank you, sir. You're very understanding." After she left, Marcus stood alone in the darkness, and for the first time since Catherine's death 2 years ago, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel: doubt. But doubt was a luxury Marcus Ashford couldn't afford, so he pushed it down, locked it away, and went to his office to work, because work was the only thing that never betrayed him, never left him, never died. He didn't see the message that popped up on Diane Foster's phone as she returned to the nursery. "Cameras down for 40 min. No evidence. Phase 2 tomorrow." And he didn't see the way Diane smiled at that message before deleting it and settling into her chair to wait for her next opportunity. Marcus Ashford hadn't slept more than 3 hours in the 18 days since he'd fired Eliza Monroe. He told himself it was the Tanaka merger, a $2.4 billion acquisition that would give Ashford Pharmaceuticals a monopoly on a revolutionary gene therapy treatment. He told himself it was the FDA approval process for their new cancer drug, or the stockholder meetings, or any of the 1,000 fires that constantly demanded his attention. He didn't tell himself it was because Leo was dying. "Mr. Ashford, you need to see this," Victoria said, entering his office on the 43rd floor without knocking, a privilege only she had. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, and she looked as impeccable as ever, but there was something in her expression that Marcus had learned to recognize over the 15 years she'd worked for him: controlled alarm. "Unless the building's on fire, it can wait," Marcus muttered, not looking up from his laptop where he was reviewing the Tanaka contracts for the 3rd time. "The merger closes in 6 hours. Leo's in the hospital." Marcus's head snapped up. What? Diane called 20 minutes ago. He started seizing. The paramedics are taking him to Northwestern Memorial. Dr. Morrison is meeting them there. The contracts scattered across his desk as Marcus grabbed his jacket and ran. Northwestern Memorial's pediatric ICU was a place Marcus had donated $10 million to over the years, ensuring they had the latest equipment and the best specialists. Now his son lay in one of those state-of-the-art beds, wires and tubes connected to his tiny body, and all that money meant nothing. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, and a systemic infection, Dr. Morrison said, his normally gentle voice tight with anger. Marcus, this child has been systematically starved. His weight is down almost 2 pounds since I last saw him 3 weeks ago. He should be thriving at 6 months old, not fighting for his life. Marcus felt the room tilt. That's impossible. Diane feeds him on schedule. I've seen the logs. I don't care what the logs say. I'm telling you what this baby's body says. Dr. Morrison pulled up charts on a tablet. Look, muscle wasting, extreme dehydration. His kidneys were on the verge of failure. This didn't happen overnight, Marcus. This has been building for weeks. But I check on him every morning before I leave. He seems fine. He's 6 months old. He can't tell you he's being neglected. He can only cry, and eventually, when no one responds, he stops crying. The doctor's voice cracked. Marcus, someone has been hurting your son. The world narrowed to a pinpoint, then expanded in a rush of nausea. Marcus gripped the wall. Diane, it has to be Diane. Where is she? I sent her home. She was hysterical, saying she didn't know what went wrong, that he seemed fine 1 minute and then. Victoria trailed off, her usually unflappable demeanor shaken. Marcus pulled out his phone and called his head of security. Daniel, I need you to pull every piece of security footage we have from the penthouse for the past 3 weeks. Everything. And I need a full background check on Diane Foster, deeper than the one we did when we hired her. I want to know where she's been, who she talks to, everything. Sir, that's a lot of footage. Then hire more people. I want it by morning. He hung up and turned back to Dr. Morrison. Will he be okay? The doctor's expression softened slightly. We're giving him fluids and nutrients intravenously. The infection is responding to antibiotics. But Marcus, children who experience neglect this severe, this early, there can be developmental consequences. Marcus sank into the chair beside Leo's bed and took his son's tiny hand. The baby's eyes were closed, his breathing assisted by a machine, and Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since Catherine died: absolute helplessness. There was a woman, he said quietly, 3 weeks ago. She was a housekeeper, and I found her nursing Leo in the middle of the night. She claimed he was sick, that Diane was neglecting him. I fired her. The silence that followed was damning. Oh, Marcus, Dr. Morrison said. She seemed unstable. She just lost her own child. Diane said she was obsessed with Leo, that she'd been watching him. The security cameras were down. There was no proof. Except the proof that's lying in this hospital bed. Marcus closed his eyes. Find her. Victoria, find Eliza Monroe, now. By 4 a.m., Marcus's security team had assembled in a conference room adjacent to the pediatric ICU. 3 analysts had spent the night reviewing footage, and what they'd found made Marcus's blood run cold. Sir, the cameras in the nursery were tampered with 7 times over the past 3 weeks, Daniel reported, pulling up footage on a large screen. Each time they went down for 30-45 minutes, always between 2 and 4 a.m. We found the malfunction, a simple device plugged into the router that creates signal interference. It was hidden behind the monitor panel. Show me what happened when they were working. The footage rolled. Diane entering the nursery at 10 p.m. preparing bottles, feeding Leo. Then nothing for hours. At 2:15 a.m. Diane would get up and leave the room, sometimes for 30 seconds, sometimes for 5 minutes. During one particularly long absence, the cameras showed Leo crying, his face red, his tiny body trembling with the effort. Where was she going? Marcus demanded. Here, sir. Daniel pulled up footage from the terrace cameras. Every night she's out there on her phone, sometimes just talking, sometimes texting. We're working on getting the phone records. What about the night I found the Monroe woman? Different footage appeared. This one showed Eliza entering the nursery at 2:47 a.m., her face stricken as she approached the crib. The audio was poor, but they could hear Leo's desperate cries. They watched as Eliza checked him, changed him, tried to give him a bottle. Then the moment she made the decision to nurse him. The cameras went offline at 2:15, Daniel noted. Diane must have activated the device before going outside, but they came back online earlier than usual, possibly because Ms. Monroe was present and Diane got nervous. Look at the timestamp when they resume, 2:53 a.m. That's when you arrived home early from your Houston trip. Marcus watched the screen, watched this woman he'd condemned gently caring for his son, singing to him, and felt bile rise in his throat. What else? The bottles, sir. We checked the ones from that night. They were in the evidence locker because you'd asked us to hold them in case there was a legal issue. They'd been tampered with, watered down to about 30% of normal formula concentration. Jesus Christ. There's more. Daniel's voice was grim. We ran the deeper background check on Diane Foster. She doesn't exist before 18 months ago. The references she provided were fake. The nursing credentials were expertly forged, but forged nonetheless. And 3 hours ago, she withdrew all her money from her bank account and disappeared. Victoria spoke up from the corner. Sir, I've been digging into your business rivals. There's been unusual trading in Ashford Pharmaceuticals stock over the past month. Someone's been short-selling, positioning themselves to profit if something catastrophic happened to your company's reputation. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. The Tanaka merger. If something happened to Leo, if there was a scandal involving my household, Tanaka would walk, the stock would crash, and whoever's short-selling would make a fortune. The timing is too perfect to be coincidental, Victoria agreed. Sir, I think Diane Foster was planted in your home specifically to create a crisis that would destroy the merger and tank your stock. Marcus stood, his hands shaking with rage. Who benefits most if Ashford Pharmaceuticals fails? Biogenesis Corp. They've been trying to acquire the Tanaka technology for years. If your merger fell through, they'd be next in line. Marcus pulled out his phone. Get me the FBI. I want Diane Foster found, and I want everyone she's been in contact with arrested. This is attempted murder and corporate sabotage. Sir, Daniel said carefully, there's still the matter of Ms. Monroe. If what we're seeing here is accurate, she was telling the truth. She saved Leo's life, and He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Find her, Marcus said, his voice rough. Find her right now. The search for Eliza Monroe began at dawn and quickly became desperate. The address on file for her was an apartment she'd been evicted from 2 weeks prior. Her phone number went to a disconnected line. She had no family in Chicago, and the few friends they located hadn't heard from her in weeks. Sir, we found her car, Daniel reported at noon. It was impounded from a lot in Pilsen 3 days ago. The landlord said she'd been living in it before the tow. Marcus felt sick. So where is she now? We're checking shelters, hospitals, anywhere she might have gone. But Eliza wasn't in any shelter that would give out information. She wasn't in any hospital database. She had vanished into the cracks of a city that swallowed desperate people every day. By the second day of searching, Leo's condition had stabilized, but he still wasn't thriving. The IV fluids were keeping him alive, but he was refusing the formula, turning his head away, his tiny body seeming to shut down without the one thing that had sustained him, the woman who'd risked everything to feed him. He's grieving, Dr. Morrison said softly. Children this young can bond intensely with a caregiver. He remembers her, Marcus. On some level, he's waiting for her. Marcus stood at the window of Leo's room, looking out at Chicago sprawled below him. 8 million people, and somewhere in that mass was the woman who'd saved his son, while he'd condemned her to the streets. Keep looking, he ordered Victoria, who'd barely left the hospital. Every shelter, every church, every soup kitchen, find her. On the third day, they found a lead. A volunteer at a clinic on the south side remembered a woman matching Eliza's description. Thin, exhausted, with a persistent cough that sounded like pneumonia. She'd come in 2 days ago but had left before they could treat her, afraid of the medical bills she couldn't pay. She was barely standing, the volunteer said. We tried to convince her to stay, but she just walked out into the cold, Haven't seen her since. Marcus felt time running out. Where would she go? Where would someone with no money, no home, go in this weather? The volunteer hesitated. There's a warming center under the red line tracks on Roosevelt. It's unofficial. The city doesn't run it, just some volunteers who let people sleep there when it gets below freezing. But it's not safe, Mr. Ashford. People die there. Marcus was out the door before she finished speaking. The warming center was exactly as nightmarish as he'd imagined. A concrete space beneath the train tracks, lined with sleeping bags and cardboard, filled with the city's most desperate residents. The volunteers running it were saints or fools, maybe both, and they eyed Marcus's $3,000 suit with open suspicion. I'm looking for someone, Marcus said, pulling up a photo of Eliza on his phone, a clear image extracted from his security footage. Her name is Eliza Monroe. She would have come here in the last few days. The lead volunteer, a graying man named Tom, studied the photo. Can't give out information on residents. She's not in trouble. I'm trying to help her. That's what they all say. Marcus's patience, already worn thread-thin, snapped. Listen to me. This woman saved my son's life, and I repaid her by throwing her out onto the street. She has pneumonia, possibly worse, and if she dies because you wouldn't tell me where she is. Third section near the back, a woman's voice interrupted. They both turned to see an older black woman wrapped in layers of coats, her eyes sharp despite her circumstances. White girl keeps to herself, coughs all night. But you're too late, mister. Ambulance took her away this morning. She collapsed. Marcus's heart stopped. Which hospital? County, probably. That's where they take folks with no insurance. Marcus was already running. Cook County Hospital's emergency room was a war zone of the underinsured and uninsured. Marcus pushed through the chaos, his name and reputation finally useful as he demanded to speak to whoever was in charge. An exhausted resident finally led him to a hallway lined with patients on gurneys. Eliza Monroe lay on one of those gurneys, an oxygen mask over her face, IV lines in both arms. She was unconscious, her face gaunt and pale, her breathing labored. She looked like she'd lost 20 pounds, like she'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Severe pneumonia, sepsis, malnutrition, exposure, the resident recited in a monotone born of exhaustion. We've started her on broad-spectrum antibiotics, but her immune system is shot. Next 24 hours will tell us if she's strong enough to fight this. Can she be moved? The resident blinked. Moved. To Northwestern, private room, best specialist money can buy. Sir, she needs immediate intensive care. Which I can provide. Better care than she'll get here, no offense. The resident looked at this billionaire who'd appeared out of nowhere demanding to move a homeless woman to one of the country's best hospitals, and simply nodded. I'll arrange the transfer. 2 hours later, Eliza Monroe was in a room 3 doors down from Leo Ashford, with 4 specialists consulting on her case. Marcus had called in every favor, pulled every string, thrown whatever money was necessary at the problem. And then he sat beside her bed, took her hand and waited. Eliza woke in pieces. First she became aware of warmth, real warmth, not the desperate shared body heat of the warming center. Then softness beneath her, a mattress, not concrete. Then the absence of pain, or rather its distant echo, muffled by medication. She opened her eyes to see pristine white walls, machines beeping softly, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Chicago. For a confused moment, she thought she'd died, and this was some kind of transitional place between worlds. Then she saw Marcus Ashford sitting in a chair beside her bed, and knew she was definitely still alive, because heaven wouldn't torture her like this. You're awake, he said quietly. He looked terrible, unshaven, his suit wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. Don't try to talk yet. You've been on a ventilator. Your throat will be sore. Eliza's hand moved instinctively to the oxygen mask over her face. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, weak, distant, foreign. You're at Northwestern Memorial, Marcus continued. You've been here for 4 days. You had severe pneumonia and sepsis. The doctors say you're past the worst of it now. She tried to speak, managed only a croak. Don't, Marcus said, leaning forward. Just listen, please. And so, because she was too weak to do otherwise, Eliza listened as Marcus Ashford, billionaire, titan of industry, man who destroyed her life, told her everything. He told her about Leo's collapse, about the hospital, about the footage they'd found. He told her about Diane Foster, who was actually Diana Wu, a corporate spy hired by Biogenesis Corp to sabotage his household and tank the Tanaka merger. He told her how Diana had been systematically starving and poisoning Leo, creating a slow crisis that would climax at the worst possible moment for Marcus's business empire. He told her that she'd been right about everything. The FBI arrested 12 people, Marcus said, his voice hollow. Diana, her handler at Biogenesis, 3 executives who orchestrated the plan, others who facilitated it. They're facing charges ranging from corporate sabotage to attempted murder. Biogenesis's stock has crashed. My merger went through. Leo's hospitalization actually generated sympathy from Tanaka. Ironic, isn't it? The crisis they created to destroy me ended up strengthening my position. He paused, his hands clenching on his knees. But none of that matters, because I almost lost my son. And it's because when a woman tried to save him, I called her crazy and threw her away. Eliza closed her eyes, tears leaking from the corners. She'd been right. Leo had been in danger, and she'd been powerless to help him. He's 3 doors down, Marcus continued. He's going to be okay physically, but he won't eat. He's on IV nutrition because he keeps refusing the bottle and the doctors say it's psychological. He bonded with you, Eliza. He remembers you, and he's waiting for you. Eliza's eyes opened. I'm not asking as your former employer, Marcus said. I'm asking as a father who failed his son. Will you help him? Will you help me save him? There were 1,000 things Eliza wanted to say. She wanted to rage at him for doubting her, for choosing to believe a stranger over the evidence of his own son's suffering. She wanted to make him understand what the past 3 weeks had been like. The fear, the hunger, the bone-deep cold and humiliation of sleeping rough in one of America's wealthiest cities. But when she opened her mouth, only 2 words came out: show me. Marcus helped her into a wheelchair. She was too weak to walk, and pushed her slowly down the pristine hospital corridor. They passed nurses who nodded respectfully, past rooms filled with other people's tragedies and miracles, until they reached a door marked with baby animals and cartoon clouds. Inside, Leo Ashford lay in a hospital crib, tubes and wires making him look even more fragile than he was. He was awake, his blue eyes, his father's eyes, staring at nothing, his face expressionless in a way that no 6-month-old's face should be. Hey, sweet baby, Eliza whispered, and Leo's head turned sharply toward her voice. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Leo's face crumpled and he began to cry, not the weak, defeated cry of a neglected child, but the demanding, furious cry of a baby who'd been abandoned and was damn well going to let everyone know about it. Eliza was out of the wheelchair before Marcus could stop her, stumbling to the crib, lifting Leo into her arms despite the IV lines and her own weakness. The baby latched onto her hospital gown, his cries intensifying, his tiny hands fisting in the fabric. I know, Eliza murmured, settling into the rocking chair someone had brought into the room. I know, baby, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you. A nurse rushed in, alarmed, but Marcus held up a hand to stop her. They watched as Eliza rocked Leo, singing that same lullaby she'd sung 3 weeks ago, and gradually, miraculously, the baby's cries subsided. He pressed his face against her chest, his breathing evening out, his body finally relaxing. Well, the nurse said softly, I guess we know what the problem was. Over the next week, Eliza regained her strength while Leo regained his will to live. The doctors agreed to let her nurse him again, proper medical supervision this time, with nutrition monitored and supplements provided. Leo took to it like he'd never stopped, his body remembering what his mind couldn't articulate. Marcus came every day. At first, Eliza thought he was checking on Leo, but gradually she realized he was checking on her too. He'd bring food from restaurants she couldn't afford, books she'd mentioned liking in passing, flowers that filled her room with color and life. You don't have to do this, she said on the 5th day, when he arrived with coffee from a place she'd mentioned once, 3 months ago, when they'd passed each other in the hallway of Ashford Tower and exchanged 30 seconds of pleasantries about the weather. I know, Marcus said, sitting in what had become his chair, but I'm going to anyway. Why? He was quiet for a long moment. When Catherine was dying, I promised her I'd take care of Leo, that he'd never feel alone or unloved, that I'd protect him from everything. His voice cracked slightly. And then I got so caught up in protecting him from the wrong things that I couldn't see the real threat. I chose my business over my son. I chose my pride over the truth. And you paid the price for my blindness. It wasn't your fault, Eliza said, surprising herself. Wasn't it? I'm the one who hired Diana without proper vetting. I'm the one who was never home enough to notice Leo was suffering. I'm the one who looked at you trying to save him and saw only a threat to be eliminated. You were grieving too, Eliza said quietly. People who are grieving don't always make good decisions. Trust me, I know. Marcus looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Two people who'd lost the loves of their lives and were trying to survive the aftermath. I want to offer you a job, Marcus said. Not as a housekeeper, as Leo's nanny. Full salary, benefits, housing in the tower if you want it, or a place of your own if you prefer. I'll pay for you to get any certifications you'd like, childcare, nursing, whatever feels right. Eliza shook her head. I can't accept that. Why not? Because you're offering it out of guilt. I'm offering it because my son comes alive when you're near him, and I'm not fool enough to ignore that twice. Marcus leaned forward. I'm also offering it because in the 3 weeks you were gone, I realized something. My empire, my money, my reputation, none of it mattered when Leo was dying. The only thing that mattered was finding the one person who'd loved him enough to risk everything for him. You did that, and I repaid you with suspicion and cruelty. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have trusted you, or at the very least investigated your claims instead of dismissing them. I failed you, Eliza. Let me make it right. Eliza looked down at Leo, sleeping peacefully in her arms, his tiny hand curled around her finger. She thought about the studio apartment she'd lost, the life she'd been barely surviving before Marcus Ashford's world had collided with hers. She thought about going back to that, to scraping by, to jobs that paid minimum wage and demanded everything, to the loneliness that had been drowning her since Daniel and their baby had died. But she also thought about what it would mean to stay, to be dependent on a man who'd proven he could turn on her in an instant, to live in his world with his rules, always knowing she was there because his son needed her, not because Marcus wanted her there. I need time, she said finally. I need to think about what's best for me, not just for Leo. Marcus nodded, and she saw something in his face, disappointment perhaps, but also respect. Take all the time you need, but while you're thinking, know this, I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a chance to do the work you were clearly born to do and to be compensated fairly for it. You saved my son when I couldn't. That matters. 2 weeks later, Eliza Monroe moved into a 3-bedroom apartment on the 38th floor of Ashford Tower. It wasn't the penthouse, but it was hers. With a view of the lake and furnishings she'd picked out herself with a budget that had made her dizzy. She reported to work each day as Leo's primary caregiver, with a salary that would let her pay off her debts and start saving for a future she'd thought was gone forever. But the arrangement came with boundaries she'd insisted on. She had her own space. She had days off. And most importantly, she had a contract that ensured she could leave at any time if things became untenable. No strings, no guilt, no obligations beyond giving 2 weeks' notice. Marcus had signed it without argument. You'll stay, he'd said, when she'd handed him the contract with shaking hands, certain he'd be insulted by her lack of trust. How do you know? Because Leo needs you, and despite everything I've done, you need him too. He was right, damn him. The first few months were awkward. Marcus was learning to be present in his son's life, to come home at reasonable hours, to put down his phone during feeding times and actually engage with the tiny human who was growing more alert and joyful every day. Eliza was learning to exist in a world where she wasn't invisible, where her opinions mattered, where her expertise was valued, where she had worth beyond her ability to clean and be silent. They circled each other like wary cats, polite and professional, both of them trying to ignore the current that ran beneath every interaction. He smiled at me today, Marcus said one evening, finding Eliza in the nursery as she was putting Leo down for the night. A real smile, not just gas. He knew who I was, and he was happy to see me. Of course he was, Eliza said, adjusting Leo's blanket. You're his father. I wasn't much of one, Marcus admitted. Before, I was so focused on building something for his future that I forgot to be present in his present. You're learning, that's what matters. Marcus moved closer, looking down at his son. Catherine used to say that love was a verb, not a feeling, that it was something you did every day in small ways. I didn't understand that until I almost lost him. Eliza said nothing, but something in her chest tightened. Thank you, Marcus said quietly, for staying, for giving me a chance to be the father he deserves. You're welcome, Eliza replied and meant it. The night everything changed started like any other. Eliza was reading in her apartment, Leo asleep in his nursery with the monitor beside her when she heard it, a sound that sent ice through her veins. Not crying. Silence. She was running before her conscious mind registered the alarm, bursting into the nursery to find Leo blue and still, not breathing. Her CPR training kicked in automatically. Chest compressions, small and controlled for an infant. Rescue breaths. 30 and 2. 30 and 2. Her hands moved while her mind screamed, and she was dimly aware of Marcus appearing in the doorway, of him calling 911, of his face going white with terror. Come on, baby, Eliza pleaded between compressions. Come on, Leo, breathe for me, please. And then, after an eternity that was probably 60 seconds, Leo coughed, gasped, began to cry, the most beautiful sound Eliza had ever heard. He's breathing, she sobbed, lifting Leo into her arms. He's okay, he's breathing. Marcus was beside her in an instant, his arms going around both of them, and for a moment they just stood there, three people clinging to each other while the specter of death retreated. The paramedics arrived to find Leo fussy but breathing, his oxygen levels normal. They took him to the hospital anyway, just to be safe, and ran every test imaginable. The diagnosis was BRUE, brief, resolved, unexplained event. Terrifying but not necessarily indicative of a bigger problem. It happens sometimes with infants, the pediatrician explained. We'll monitor him, but he seems fine now. You did everything right, Ms. Monroe. You saved his life. In the hospital waiting room at 3 a.m., Marcus turned to Eliza. Twice, he said. You've saved him twice, and both times I had no idea what to do. You called 911. You were there. That's what mattered. No, Marcus said. What mattered is that you knew exactly what to do and you did it. What mattered is that you love him. He paused. The way I should have loved him all along. Marcus. When I saw him lying there not breathing, I understood something. Marcus's voice was rough with emotion. All the money, all the power, all the empire I've built, none of it matters if I can't protect the people I love. And I realized, I don't just mean Leo. Eliza's breath caught. What do you mean? I mean that somewhere in the past few months, watching you with my son, watching you rebuild your life, watching your strength and your compassion and your refusal to be diminished by what happened to you, I stopped seeing you as just Leo's caregiver. I started seeing you as the woman who makes my house feel like a home, the woman I look forward to seeing every morning, the woman who's teaching me how to be human again. Marcus, you're in shock. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 2 years, Marcus interrupted. And I know this is complicated. I know I have no right to feel this way after what I did to you. I know you probably can't even look at me without remembering that night. But Eliza, I'm falling in love with you and I needed you to know. Even if you can never forgive me, even if you leave tomorrow, I needed you to know. Eliza stared at him, this man who'd been her nightmare and her salvation, who destroyed her and rebuilt her, who was looking at her now with such raw vulnerability that it hurt to see. I don't know what I feel, she admitted. I know I care about Leo more than anything. I know that working for you has given me back a sense of purpose I thought I'd lost forever. I know that sometimes when you come home and smile at something Leo did, I forget to breathe for a second. But Marcus, I also remember what it felt like to be thrown away. To be called crazy and dismissed and left to die on the street because you couldn't see past your own fears. I know, Marcus said, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm not that man anymore, that I learned from that mistake, that I'll never fail you like that again. You can't promise that. No one can promise that. You're right, Marcus agreed. But I can promise that I'll try. Every day I'll try to be worthy of your trust, and if I fail, I'll own it and do better, the way you taught me to. Eliza looked at this man, this powerful, brilliant, damaged man who'd learned humility the hardest way possible. She thought about the life she could have with him, and the life she'd have without him. She thought about risk and trust and the terrifying possibility of happiness. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to know that what I'm feeling is real and not just gratitude or Stockholm syndrome or proximity." "Take all the time you need," Marcus said. "I'll be here, we'll be here." And so time passed. Weeks became months. Leo grew stronger, hit his milestones, became a laughing, curious toddler who ruled the penthouse like a tiny emperor. Eliza settled into her role, into her life, into the strange new reality where she mattered and was valued and had worth beyond her usefulness. And gradually, carefully, she and Marcus built something new. It started with conversations over breakfast while Leo smeared oatmeal in his hair. It continued with shared looks across the nursery when Leo did something adorable. It deepened with late-night talks in the kitchen when neither of them could sleep, discussing their lost loves and their grief and their slow, painful healing. One night 6 months after Leo's BRUE episode, Marcus found Eliza on the terrace, looking out at the city lights. "Can't sleep?" he asked, joining her at the railing. "Too much coffee," she glanced at him. "You?" "Too much thinking." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "I've been thinking too," Eliza said, "about what you said in the hospital." Marcus's hand tightened on the railing. And I think I'm ready to try to see if what I feel is real, to risk it." She turned to face him. "But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I'm not Catherine. I can't be her and I won't try to be." "I don't want you to be Catherine," Marcus said softly. "I want you to be Eliza, the woman who saw my son suffering and couldn't walk away, the woman who survived hell and came back stronger, the woman who's teaching me that strength and gentleness aren't opposites. I want you exactly as you are. Even with all my damage, all my grief. Especially with your damage and your grief, because you didn't let it make you cruel or bitter. You let it make you compassionate. You're the bravest person I've ever met, Eliza Monroe." She kissed him then, there on the terrace 43 floors above Chicago, and it felt like falling and flying at the same time. From the nursery monitor, they heard Leo make a sound, not distress, just his sleepy babbling as he settled into deeper sleep. Marcus and Eliza looked at each other and smiled. "We should check on him," Eliza said. "We should," Marcus agreed, taking her hand. They walked back inside together, two broken people who'd found a way to heal each other, to build something new from the wreckage of their old lives. They weren't a typical family. Their foundation was laid on trauma and near tragedy and mistakes that almost destroyed everything. But they were theirs, this strange, imperfect, miraculous collection of damaged hearts learning to beat together. And as they stood over Leo's crib, watching him sleep, both of them understood that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't the ones that start perfectly. They're the ones that survive imperfection and come out stronger on the other side. "I love you," Marcus whispered, not sure if he was talking to Leo or Eliza or both. "We love you too," Eliza replied, and wrapped her arm around his waist, and they stood there in the darkness, three people who'd found each other against all odds and decided that was enough. That was everything. Can you imagine being in Eliza's position, knowing you were right, knowing a child was in danger, but having no one believe you? How many times have you seen someone speak the truth only to be dismissed, discarded, or worse? This story hits differently because it's a mirror of the world we live in, where the powerful make mistakes and the vulnerable pay the price. But it's also a story of redemption, of a man who was willing to look at his own failures and change. Marcus Ashford could have doubled down, protected his ego, let his pride destroy everything. Instead, he chose accountability. He chose humility. And most importantly, he chose to make things right, even when it cost him everything he thought mattered. This story reminds us that justice isn't always immediate, and healing isn't always fast, but both are possible when people are willing to own their mistakes and fight for what's right. Eliza didn't just survive, she thrived. She refused to be broken by a system that tried to erase her. That's the kind of strength we need to celebrate. That's the kind of story that needs to be told. If this story made your blood boil when Marcus dismissed Eliza, if you felt your heart break when she was left to suffer in the cold, if you felt that surge of satisfaction when the truth finally came to light, You're not alone. That anger, that pain, that hope for justice, that's what connects us as human beings. That's what reminds us that we're all fighting for something better. So here's what I need from you. Drop a like if you believe the truth always finds a way to surface, even when it takes time. Hit that like button if you've ever been dismissed or underestimated and fought your way back. Comment, Justice SERVAD, if you felt that satisfaction when Marcus realized his mistake. Comment, Never again, if you believe we should always protect the vulnerable, even when it's inconvenient. Subscribe and hit the bell if you want more stories like this. Don't let this story end here. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who's been dismissed or overlooked. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that mercy and power can coexist. Let's make sure Eliza's story reaches the people who need it most. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. Now go out there and be the person who notices when something's wrong. Be the person who stands up even when it's hard. Be the Eliza in someone's story. And remember, justice may be delayed, but it's never defeated when people like you refuse to stay silent. Smash that like button, comment below, subscribe for more stories that matter. Let's build a community that refuses to look away.